Hello, how are you? Hope you're doing well in your neck of the woods. Certainly doing okay over here, and enjoying doing some new videos for people as well. I've got another topic that I've just wanted to, that I alluded to in another video, and it's something that really is something that I have struggled with a lot, and it gives me a lot of stress. It gives me a lot of sleepless nights. And I think it's something that a lot of people sort of concern themselves with, but they probably don't. It's hard to think about because it's so many things. And I actually got this book out to I didn't go to the library. I got Audible. To actually try and understand a little bit more for myself. And I found it quite a good book. It was called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I hope that's how you say his name, Housel. And it was quite an interesting book. And as he himself says, it's a very readable book because it's split up into 20 chapters that can be just read by themselves. You don't need to do anything. You don't have to read it sequentially. There might be some chapters that you like, hey, I've got this. And then the other, well, you can just read the ones you want. You don't, and you can also come back to it because they are linked, but they are also separate. So it's quite an interesting book, and it's quite interesting how he sort of puts it, because at the beginning he sort of says, and you're welcome, indicating that it makes it a little bit easier to read, and it's but it is an interesting book because it goes through all these sort of ideas around money and how we have it. And I think one of the there's a couple of concepts that I got. There's one that I had that I talked about previously, which was this concept of enough. But another one was this concept that no two people have the same ideals about money or have had the same reaction with money. And that was quite interesting to sort of think about because, I sometimes have these thoughts about money, and I always sort of struggle when other people don't think like that, and how can you not think like that? But he just gave some very simple examples. He sort of said, some people who grew up in the 80s would have been quite aware of inflation and high interest rates and all of those things that come. So they would have been in that, they've sort of dealt with that once before. So what we're dealing with in our current situation, where we are having slightly higher in inflation and we've got slightly higher interest rates, for those people that have been through it once before, it's sort of like, well, this is actually not that bad. For those people that have maybe born past the 80s and they've never had high inflation or had fairly reasonable interest rates most of the time, this is then such a big thing. But you can sort of see how those two people would have quite a different view of money and potentially other things. Even sort of thinking about things around the stock market and things like that, and investing in stuff. Even if you had different views, if you'd been around in 87 when there was a huge crash in the stock market, you may never trust stocks again. For those people who've been post that and sort of lived through the 2008 GFC. Yeah, GFC. You might also sort of feel like stock market's just not the place to be. But somebody who's been outside of that and maybe wasn't in the stock market during those two events might think the stock market's great. Also, if you've had access to money most of your life, or you've had to always scrimp and save, might also give you a different view on how money is and what money means. And it was quite interesting, like, when you hear these things, it's sort of like, yeah, obviously. But at the time, when you're in your own little world, it's very difficult to have those sort of viewpoints and think of, yeah, obviously, because there isn't anything obvious about it. You've got a view about money, or you've got a view about a certain thing, and it is very much your way of viewing it. And you think everybody else has had the same sort of things, but you have had, not only have you had those environmental issues that you've been, but you've also had how your family treats money. So if you've in a family of spenders, or a family of I can't think of the other words, but of non-spenders, thrifty is not the word, but there's a word, I can't think of it right now. But if you were in one of those two families, you'd have a different view of money. You might be quite resentful that no money was ever spent on you if you were in a non-spenders group. And if you're in a spenders group, you might sort of think spending money on things is quite natural. So those things can then have quite a sort of an impact on you when you have your own money and you are starting to do those things. And for me, thinking about those sort of things, I have quite a complex relationship, and I think a lot of my mental hurt and anxiety and depression comes from my relationship with money as well, in terms of how I feel and how you value yourself. A lot of times when we have money, we feel a bit more better about ourselves. We feel like we've got more self-value. But when we maybe hit a rut, and I remember one time coming into a new place, a new situation, we had to move somewhere, and not being able to find a job for close to 3 months. That was a hell of a position to be in, and a hell of a time, and it absolutely nearly wiped me out. I nearly had I think I had a nervous breakdown a little bit later, because the stress of it all and feeling that relationship in terms of you are the breadwinner, you are the person that everybody's relying on. I had 2 young kids and my wife, and we had savings, so we had enough for probably 5 months probably, and then we were going to get really quite strict. But it's amazing when you don't have that secure income, it makes it very difficult to. And I'm not telling people to suck eggs, but it was certainly sort of heightened that, and that's why I've always been very cautious about a lot of things. But it heightened that. Couldn't get a new property because we just moved, and we'd moved into a short-term rental, which was obviously higher, and then we were trying to find a long-term rental. Wouldn't look at me, even though we had money in the bank. Don't care. And just is the money, how long is that money? Is there going to be any sort of problems, things that are going to come on? It really, it sort of, for me, it made quite an impression. And I know a lot of people face this constantly, so probably a lot of people think, oh, whoop-dee, you had it once, I have it all my life, or I have it constantly, or I'm constantly living in that sort of state. And hats go off to those people who can survive in that. Maybe they've got better coping strategies than I certainly have, but I really feel for those people who are constantly in that sort of situation where they're constantly wondering where everything else comes from, and what's going to be the next thing that they can do. It was really quite a stressful situation. I think from that and from other things, that it's always been about trying to always get more, be secure, feeling set. And so, now being redundant, I'm starting to feel those feelings again of being a little bit like, is everything going to be all right? Am I going to find some work? And I have been looking, and I'm of that age, I think, where people sort of look, well, you're not young, you're not looking to start a career, and you're a little bit older, so are you a threat to me in another way? So I think you get it from both ends. And so it's very difficult to be in that situation of trying to find something when people are sort of like, oh, well, you mightn't have any ambition anymore. And, to be honest, I don't really, not in the workforce. I just want to be there doing a decent job and doing something. But I've also got heaps of skills in one sense. It's very difficult. But so this all then constantly plays on my mind around what I'm thinking around from a money point of view. Have I got enough? Am I going to be, is it going to be problematic in the future? Am I going to be having enough to do all the things that I want to do, and all those sort of things? Or is there something else that's going to come my way? And I think that in that book, that sort of idea that everybody sort of feels it in a different way, also has allowed me to sort of understand the relationship I have with my wife a little bit more, and about our relationship with money. It's pretty good, but then there are some things where we are sort of think about it a little bit differently, and some of that is in our risk ability to take risks, and some of it is in our potential spending habits or those sort of things. But I found that book, and there's quite a lot of other things in that book around the psychology of money that really help you to tease out your own sort of feelings and your own sort of stuff that actually can be quite interesting to sort of understand what you think about things. You know, you might be a spender, but it actually inside it's totally against the grain. Or you might have a relationship with somebody else that is a spender and you're a non-spender, and you're constantly sort of thinking, well, how are we this is not working, and maybe it's because of how you grew up, and sometimes tracing it back to the things that happen in your formative years, which is probably more your teens and your 20s, is probably when your thoughts around money, that's when probably money was discussed at the dining room table. You were a little bit more aware. You might have already got your first job as well, so you understand that where money comes from and what it can do for you. And also there might have been stresses around that time from parents as well, because they're raising kids, they've probably got a mortgage, maybe got 2 jobs, lots of things, lots of expenses and stuff. And so and then also you're probably starting to be aware of news and what's happening and how things are hitting you. So all of those things can then have that impact on you and your relationship with money. And this book, The Psychology of Money, by Morgan Housel, was quite interested in sort of delving into that, and I found it quite interesting. I'm still got a couple of more chapters to go, but I found it quite interesting. So if anybody's got those sort of concerns around money, or what they think about money, or things, sometimes that book might be quite good. It's based on a lot of research as well, which I always like. I'm very much about something where there's some depth to it. And I think that one was quite good. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, have a read. It's really quite good, and I think it's well worth just even reading a few chapters of it, because you'll understand yourself and your thoughts about money a lot better. Anyway, hopefully that was of interest. Sorry, I rambled a little bit there, but thoughts come when they do. And hopefully I'll see you again on another video. Okay, thanks a lot for listening. Appreciate your time. Thank you. Goodbye.